Mr. President, distinguished colleagues, today we have gathered for a special meeting, a commemorative meeting of the General Assembly to mark the memory of all the victims of the Second World War. On the 9th of May, in an area of Berlin, Karlhorst, the final act on the unconditional capitulation was signed. Nazism was vanquished at its lair, Berlin, which was taken by the Red Army. On the 1st of March, before the Reichstag, the Red Banner Victory was raised, and on that day, the Soviet General Chirkov was approached by the head of the General Troops, General Headquarters, who announced to him that Hitler had committed suicide in his bunker. The most horrific page in history was a tragic page, a chapter of history was turned, and the world was refrained from a step away from the abyss of the theory of racial superiority, where the value of human life was determined through the measuring of skulls. And what is important to recall that this horrific theory was not the fruit of Hitler's fantasies. This was born with European intellectuals. Suffice it to recall the theory of superiority, the essay on inequality of human races from the French writer Arthur de Gobineau. Colonialist racism, which was embraced by Europeans, was supplemented by Nazis with their radical anti-Semitism and anti-Slavism. And we can only imagine a world where such European so-called values prevailed. And this is precisely what happened. Nazism and fascism emerged, and they became popular. And in many European countries, supporters took power. And this is why Hitler's march was triumphant until it encountered the heroic resistance of the peoples of the Soviet Union. Let us recall that Hitler enjoyed sympathies and support from members of the British royal family, and Italy, Finland, Romania fought on the side of Hitler, providing 700,000 soldiers. The French Legion, the Spanish Volunteers, Norwegian SS Legion, the Dutch SS Legion, the Latvian Legion, which was particularly harsh and brutal. The Estonian voluntary SS fought on their side, and many Ukrainian nationalists also fought on the side of Hitler. In 1941, all anti-fascist forces managed to unite. The ideological opponents, the United States and the USSR and the United Kingdom of Great Britain, managed to, who had armed conflict in their past, demonstrated wisdom, and they stood shoulder to shoulder, and they set aside ideological considerations and did not attempt to equate fascism and communism. It was clear where there was good, where there was evil, and the victory came at the cost of millions of people. China lost 35 million people. The United States approximately half a million. Serbia organized the largest partisan movement in Europe. The struggle for the freedom of the peoples was carried out by heroes from Latin America, Asia, and Africa. The cost for the Soviet Union was 27 million people, and 12 million people were part of the military losses. Millions of victims included civilians as a result of the policy of genocide, which was carried out by the Nazis, targeting the peoples of the Soviet Union. The war with the USSR had other goals than in Europe. On the 12th of June 1941, Himmler stated that the aim of the March on Russia was a reduction of the number of Slavs by 30 million people. Another laconic statement is attributed to the German Hermann Henrig, a successor of the Führer and the head of the Ost Division the Ost economic headquarters, and he stated that he stated in 1941, some people need to be reduced in number. Those holding power is in the Axis countries viewed the need, supported and understood and tolerated the need for genocide against the peoples of the USSR with their inherent pragmatic cynicism. The cost, they sought to derive benefits from the Black Sea areas, including Ukraine, and to send this abundant material to so-called forested areas in Moscow and Petersburg, from so-called forested areas, Moscow and St. Petersburg, to Europe. This was documented, this genocide was documented in the product of the Ost headquarters document entitled Directives on Economic Policy for Agriculture. This was based on the work of the Nazi economist Herbert Backe. The U.S. prosecutor at Nuremberg, Whitney Harris, characterized this as follows. This document portrays the plan previously developed for the murder of millions of innocent Soviet citizens through starvation. This document clearly shows that the murder of millions of innocents was deliberate and planned ahead of time. This document shows that this plan for murder resulted in such a large scale, and the scale went beyond any human imagination. And in this way, the horrific blockade of Leningrad was carried out, claiming the lives of millions of people. And this was no accident. It was a result of, nor a result of the siege of the city. This was part of a deliberate policy of starvation. However, hunger is not the only weapon. Starvation is not the only weapon of genocide. As Hitler said, we're talking about fight for elimination, extermination. This struggle will be distinguished from the war in the West. It will be distinct from the war in the West, and in the East, brutality itself will be a benefit for the future. More than many people were exterminated and buildings were destroyed. Entire villages and towns were razed to the ground. We cannot recall the Belarusian village Khating, where 149 people were burned alive, including 75 children. And in these crimes, 200 Ukrainian nationalists led by Stepan Bandera were implicated, and they also became notorious for participation in brutal acts perpetrated during the Holocaust, including the July 1941 pogroms in Bandera, the executions of Jews, for example, in Babi Yar near Kiev, and in Sosin Ryad near the Ukrainian city of Rovno, where 23,000 people were killed. Nor can we forget the horrific Volyn massacre, which was perpetrated by the Banderites. As a result of this crime, 50 to 60,000 Polish civilians were murdered, and these the Soviet military prisoners of war endured horrific fates. They were starved, their bodies were exposed, and medical experiments were carried out on them in Auschwitz. The Soviet military prisoners of war were the first victims of the gas chambers, and nor can we forget the Ostarbeiters, residents of the Soviet Union, who were brought to Germany, and their slave labor was used by well-known companies, including Daimler-Benz, Deutsche Bank, Siemens, Volkswagen, BMW, and others. And the slave labor was used also by ordinary Germans. They had announcements related to these people, and they traveled essentially selling them at slave markets in the 20th century. And the prisoners of war demonstrated a peerless courage as they resisted and stood up against these evils. The horrific Nazi atrocities did not require any evidence to prove them. They were well known as an axiom. However, the time has arrived, and the sacred memory of the heroes, of the victims of Nazism, is now being attacked by by proponents of historical revisionism and revanchism, and the unnatural Nazi idea of dividing people into inferior races is now being whitewashed, and the supporters of this are being glorified. In Baltic countries, there are marches championing of the Hitlerite henchmen. In those countries and other Eastern European countries, there are monuments being erected to heroes who the monuments are being taken down, monuments dedicated to heroes in the victory against Nazism. And the Ukrainian, there's a Ukrainian slogan that is exactly the exact same as a German slogan, Deutschland über alles. This is there are monuments to fighters against fascism being taken down. Nachtil and Roman Shukhevich are being glorified. Stepan Bandera and henchmen are being glorified. There are marches being carried out on days commemorating the Nazis and supported by neo-Nazis. In Kiev, for example, a Soviet prospect, General Vatutin, a hero of the Second World War, this monument was taken down and is now being replaced by one supporting Stepan Bandera and Roman Shukhevich. We will not allow the international community to forget that the Nazism and the idea of Nazism is growing. There's growing support for this, and there are growing numbers of supporters for this ideology in Europe. Modern methods for bringing in supporters, including from young people, including social networks, are being used to bring in supporters. They're even managing to carry out athletic events, rock concerts, and lectures. All of this is not one-off. This is systemic in nature. We are closely following the situation, and we are publishing the relevant reports. There are attempts to demonstrate to us that supporting and glorifying Hitler, his supporters and ideology, is the exercise of the right to freedom of expression, freedom of belief. And yet last year and this year in Berlin on the 8th and 9th of May, near the Soviet war memorials, demonstrations have been prohibited, not just with Georgian ribbons and military songs, but even ordens and medals and even uniforms for the victors are prohibited, including photographs. Moreover, senior EU officials are brandishing threats of sanctions, and they're calling for people to visit Kiev instead. And so the question is, who will be supported and glorified and memorialized in Kiev? The millions of Ukrainians who heroically fought with the Red Army and who lost their lives in the fight to Nazism, or the Nazi henchmen of Bandera and Shukhevich. There is a need for clarity in this question because the victims and executioners cannot be placed on equal footing. I do apologize, says the speaker. It is noteworthy that honoring a commemoration of Victory Day, something which is not being done or rejected by those states who for a number of years have laid down obstacles to the General Assembly's adoption of a resolution on combating glorification of Nazism. Is it possible to even consider voting against this initiative at the United Nations, an international organization who, with its very name, was founded by states members of the anti-Hitler coalition? We need to remember that victory not just freed people from horrors and suffering and brought victory, but also brought about a new world order under the central role of the United Nations based on the principles of cooperation, sovereign equality of all states, and non-discrimination. I will not be surprised if there will be attempts today to try to tell us or describe to us alternative history to the Second World War, where Soviet soldiers were irrelevant and there were communists. But on 9 May 43 minutes, a Hitlerite Germany definitively capitulated. We won the victory over Nazism, which you will not be able to cancel. Russia's commitment to preservation of the historic truth remains steadfast, contrary to attempts to undertaken by our foes. We will not, and we do not politicize the victory. We view this as a shared victory, and we pay tribute to the memory of all peoples of the former USSR who contributed to this weighty contribution. This included all peoples of the Soviet Union. All peoples of the Soviet Union contributed to the victory, including Russians, Ukrainians, Belarusians, Georgians, Armenians, Azeris, Moldovans, those Baltic Kazakhs, residents of Kyrgyzstan, Uzbeks, Tajiks, Turkmen, Jews, and dozens of other nationalities within our vast country this year, together with our allies, Belarus, Azerbaijan, Armenia, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, China, Serbia, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan. We initiated the adoption of a General Assembly resolution on the 80th anniversary of the end of the Second World War, in accordance with which the victory will be commemorated every 5 years. I will conclude with the words of General Zhukov, who is known as the Marshal of Victory. He is precisely the person who, in 1945, who accepted the capitulation of the German armed forces. With each year that passes, we increasingly move away from wartime. A new generation of young people has grown. For them, war is our memory of them, and we who participated in these historic events the war will forever remain etched in our hearts. We will forever remember the great feat that was achieved by the Soviet people. We, the participants of these historic events, this was a time that was exceedingly difficult, but it was very sacred. A person who experiences significant trials and who vanquishes this will forever draw strength from this victory. This is just for all peoples. Our victory in the war against fascism, speaking eloquently, is a part of that constellation of the Soviet people. We have gained tremendous moral capital. Looking back, we will always remember those who sacrificed themselves.
As we reflect on the unimaginable cost of World War II, the millions of lives lost, the cities reduced to rubble, the dignity of humanity trampled under totalitarian boots, we are reminded of a duty that transcends politics, the duty to remember, to honor the fallen. We must confront revisionism, reject the glorification of fascism, and uphold the truth of history. May the pain of the past sharpen our vigilance, and may the memory of the victims forever guide our steps toward peace, justice, and unity. Never again is not a slogan, it's a responsibility.